deep dives into hidden mental and emotional valleys and steep peaks of what ails and hinders us from thriving far and beyond surviving. This is a show to awaken the sleeping giants and hidden phenomenal in all of us. R&R. Welcome. You've entered the space to release and rediscover. R&R with Topazz is an experience fueled to heal the soul with real talk and deep dives into hidden mental and emotional valleys and steep peaks of what ails and hinders us from thriving far and beyond surviving. This is a show to awaken the sleeping giants and hidden phenomenal in all of us. R&R. Welcome. Entered the space to release and rediscover. R&R with Topazz is an experience fueled to heal the soul with real talk and deep dives into hidden mental and emotional valleys and steep peaks of what ails and hinders us from thriving far and beyond surviving. This is a show to awaken the sleeping giants and hidden phenomenal in all of us. R&R. Welcome.
Good evening.
This is Topazz with R&R with Topazz. How are you all doing on this Monday evening, on this post resurrection Sunday? Hopefully all is well, or post Easter, however you want to look at it. Hopefully you all had a good weekend. It was a beautiful day yesterday. I sure hope you got out and enjoyed some sunshine. I know I did. You are again watching R&R with Topazz out of the Mile High City in Denver. Make sure that you subscribe and share. Subscribe and share. Hit the notification bell so that you can be notified anytime I'm on the air. This is R&R with Topazz on CTN Media, where we are changing the narrative. This media station is for us, by us, and all about us. That's right. So, you know what? I want to make sure that you all know that I'm looking forward to hearing from you this evening. I need you to drop your comments in the chat. I need you to just respond. I want to hear from you. This show is designed for you. So I need to know what you're thinking, how you're feeling, what questions you have. Maybe there's some things that you'll hear that you may not necessarily agree with. That's okay too. You are welcome to share your truths right here. And I'm going to give a trigger alert this evening because we are going to be talking about trauma. That's right, our trauma. Our trauma deserves a space. Our trauma deserves to be heard. We deserve to have a voice. And it's time for us to give each other permission to do that. It's time for us to breathe so that we can start moving beyond the trauma that has held us back for far too long. It's been a suppressive, oppressive state for far too long, either afraid to talk about our trauma, don't really even recognize what our trauma is. There's confusion about trauma. There's denial about trauma. Trauma is put on the back burner because it's overwhelming. We really don't know how to respond to our trauma. It can cause this state of panic, anxiety, silence, and denial. And so tonight, this hour is dedicated to addressing some of our trauma. Now, I'm very much aware that I'm not going to be able to adequately address our trauma in this one show this evening. That is something that could easily take the entire season. All 8 episodes could be focused on trauma, and we still wouldn't be able to get through our trauma. So I want to say that up front. But I'm going to take a stab at looking at a couple of different areas, and I decided to shift my original topic to this just because of all of what we've been dealing with in most recent times. We spoke about death and loss, grief and loss last week, and that in and of itself is trauma. So let me pause for a second. And again, I want to make sure that I am consistent in acknowledging those who may be suffering from some level of grief or trauma or loss. I'm sorry. If you've had a recent loss, I just want to extend deepest condolences to you, prayers to you and your family. These are hard times, and just adjusting to the reality that someone who we love so much, someone who our life has been spent with, or the majority of our lives, maybe even a short part of our lives, is no longer there, not because you've decided to separate or go separate ways, but because they've actually transitioned. They've died, and walking by that empty space, whether it's in the bedroom, whether it's in the office next to you, whether it's the space in the bed next to you, is empty, and knowing that it will never be filled again by that person is overwhelming. Your child, your spouse, a sibling, a best friend, a neighbor, even a coworker who you didn't know very well, but you saw on a consistent basis. The fact that they are gone can disrupt normalcy, can disrupt patterns that are familiar and comfort zones. So we're going to talk about a couple of different areas of trauma, and I would be doing a disservice if I didn't spend some time looking at post-traumatic slave syndrome, because there is a difference between post-traumatic slave syndrome and post-traumatic stress disorder. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to probably the originator of the term, the expert, author, Dr. Joy DeGruy, have a brief video where she is going to talk about what post-traumatic slave disorder or post-traumatic slave syndrome is all about. So if we could play that video, please. Let's see if we can get that going.
That really looks at multi-generational trauma. One of the things that's difficult for people is their first response is, oh my God, that happened so long ago. We're talking about people being captured, shipped, sold, beaten, raped, experimented on. And then you have to ask the question, did the trauma continue? Yes. So 300 years of trauma, no help, freed, no help, more trauma. If it's a sustained trauma, then the impact of that is also sustained. When we look at multi-generational trauma, we're looking at people who are maybe victims of natural disasters and their families and their children and generations of folks who have experienced war. And we know that there are residual mental, emotional, traumatic impact. And what I did was I started to look at the African-American experience, starting with slavery, as a real clear, long enduring trauma. So I started to see that there were clear connections between that survival behavior and contemporary living in African American experience. I started to see common behaviors that I took for granted as, well, cultural. There's adaptive behaviors, survival behaviors. Well, what are they? Let's just say 2019, you have a Black mother and a white mother. The sons go to school together. They find themselves at a meeting. The Black mother leans over to the white mother and says, I just wanted to mention to you that I noticed that your son is really doing quite well. And the white mother's response is, oh, thank you. She begins to go on and on about he won the science fair, his uncle's an astronaut. She's just oozing. She realizes the Black mother's son is actually excelling her son. And she says, well, wait a minute. Your son's the one that's really coming along. And the Black mother responds, oh my God, he's a handful, but oh, he just works my nerves. Now, when I'm working with African-American people, it doesn't matter what the audience is. It doesn't matter what class. If I were to ask, is she very proud while she's saying those denigrating things? And everybody laughs and goes, of course, there's a secret. Because everybody Black knows that even though the Black mother is going, oh my God, she's really proud. So now let's roll that scene back 300 years. And let's say this Black mother is working in the fields and a white slave owner comes through and says, wow, that boy is really coming along. What is she gonna say? No, he's not. He's stupid. He's shiftless. He can't work, because I don't want you to sell him. So I denigrate them to protect them. That is called appropriate adaptation when living in a hostile environment. The little white boy, say Timmy, he feels really comfortable and happy about what his mom just said about him. And Trey looks at his mom and wonders, why can't you be proud of me? Because he doesn't understand the secret yet. And by the time he learns the secret, he will have already been injured by it. Post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Okay, thank you. You can stop the video.
It's a disorder that occurs as a result of a single trauma. You don't even have to be.
Thank you. All right. So I wanted you to have an opportunity to just hear from the originator of the term and hear from her.
Uncomfortable or difficult to conceal. At Urban Carry, we know you just want to easily carry a gun at all times with immediate.
From somebody in the store.
Pause the video, please. Sorry about that, folks. But at any rate, we need to know what we're talking about when we're talking about trauma. What are we referencing? And I think that part of the reason why so many in our community have a tendency to minimize or deny their own trauma is because there's a misunderstanding about what trauma is. And I believe that it starts right back in those times of slavery, and that's with regard to those same inferences from Dr. Mcbride as it relates to what was necessary, what was required of us in order to survive that appropriate adaptive response to survive in experiences of trauma. If we or our ancestors, those that have come before us, if they had of truly been in touch with their trauma in the way that is most appropriate for us to be healthy emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and physically, it requires a lot of attention given to that. They didn't have time for that. There was no time for that. And there was no support in that. There was no confirmation of what people were feeling. Everyone was pushed to just keep moving, keep doing what's necessary, because the trauma was consistent. It was constant. It was daily. It was throughout the day. How many times husbands, brothers, uncles, friends had to watch a woman who may have been very close to them, whether it was their mother or their daughter, because there was no consideration for age, whether it was their wife, their aunt, it didn't matter. It's so many times young boys and men were subject and forced to watch the abuse of Black women on the plantation, and even beyond, forced to watch them being brutalized, being raped. And the reverse was happening as well, where wives and children and parents were forced to watch their sons being castrated, being sodomized, or having limbs chopped off, being lynched. All of that was happening consistently. And if you dare try to give voice to the impact of being exposed to such trauma, if you dare try to draw attention to that, or you cried too long, or you sorrowed too long, or cried, complained or tried to fight against that, then the likelihood of you becoming the next victim was what? Great. It was likely. And so there was this conditioning that was happening where the idea or the normalcy of giving voice to your traumatic experience or exposure was just not appropriate. And so there had to be an adaptive process to reality. You have to adapt to that and begin to normalize it and separate from it, separate your humanness, separate your compassion from it, a form of cognitive dissonance, and survive. So let's bring that up current to present day trauma. And so at this time, I'm going to show you another clip. And while we're waiting for that clip, don't forget to put your comments in the chat. Let me know what you're thinking, share how you're feeling, and just engage. I really want, as much as possible, if we can just center this show tonight around where you are, where you're at, what you're dealing with, and what your impressions are of what's happening in this time. Yeah. So is that a signal that you're ready? I heard a yeah. Okay, awesome.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution has called their next witness. It is a 9-year-old child, the cousin of the last witness who was also there that day. Take a look.
New York nigga George Floyd.
Okay, now you mentioned someone named George Floyd.
Yes.
Did you know George Floyd before May 25th?
I can't hear
Could you say that again? You can't hear?
it. No.
Okay. Had you ever met George Floyd before
No.
going into Cup Foods that day?
No.
As far as you know, had you ever seen it?
No.
Now, when you came out to where your cousin was and you saw George Floyd, was there a policeman there?
Yes.
Do you remember what the policeman or policemen were doing?
Putting a knee on neck with George Floyd.
If I showed you a picture of a policeman, why don't I just do that? Let me ask you if you recognize the policeman in what's marked as Exhibit 17. Do you recognize this man?
Yes.
Who is he?
I can't remember his name.
Okay. Do you remember what he was doing? How do you know him?
He was putting a knee on neck with George Floyd.
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
No.
Okay. How about him?
Yes.
All right. So is that the person that you saw?
Yes.
So you saw a knee being put on the neck of George Floyd. When was the knee taken? Did you see that the knee was ever taken off of George Floyd's neck?
No.
Were you there when an ambulance came?
Yes.
Tell us what happened after you saw the ambulance come.
Yes. The ambulance had to push him off of him.
And how did that happen? Did they simply come in an ambulance and then go up to push him off, or what happened?
They asked him nicely to get off of him.
And when they asked him nicely to get off of him, what did he do?
He still stayed on him.
And then what happened after he still stayed on him? What did the ambulance people do?
They just had to put him off, get off of him.
Are you able to tell us, having been there on this day and seeing the officer on top of George Floyd, how did you feel about that? How did it affect you?
I was sad and kind of mad.
And tell us, why were you sad and mad?
Because it felt like he was stopping his breathing, and it's kind of like hurting him.
All right. So I want to give viewers an opportunity to just breathe for a moment, especially bearing in mind that you just heard a 9-year-old testifying to seeing, not via video, not on the news, not on social media, but right before her eyes, watching this human being, this man who could have been her father, could have been her uncle, grandfather, even possibly, I don't know, but watching him be murdered right before her eyes. Now, she was with her cousin who was 15 years old at the time, or 16, I'm sorry. And she was with her cousin who tried to shield her actually from it, because when they were on their way to the store, the incident was already in process and or in progress. And her older cousin shuffled her into the store and came back out so that she could videotape what was happening. And then the little girl eventually either came to the window, or she must have come outside because she could hear clearly what was being said. I have a niece that is pretty close to 9 years old. I can't imagine her processing through, coming through, walking through, having eyewitnessed something so heinous. I don't know about you. Some of you may have children that young or grandchildren that young. And if you can just imagine how do you help your child come through that imagery, that level of intrusive flashback or intrusive memories. How do you support her through that? As a clinician, as a therapist, a licensed therapist, I struggle with that myself. It's a process. I've had young children that I've worked with in the past who have been victims of trauma, and that's not necessarily my area working with the younger ones, although I have in my career worked with them. There are people who are more gifted and that is their area of calling, but my heart is so heavily weighted in those situations that I don't think I do my best work. It really takes a true special calling, I believe, to work with young children who have been exposed to trauma, and to really be effective at it. So, I acknowledge where my strengths are, and I try to stay in my lane. But again, my question to you is, if it were your niece, your daughter, what do you share with her in the middle of the night when she wakes up screaming? But that's just one um, example of what our babies go through. Our babies, let alone the adults. I think about secondary trauma. Um, Secondary trauma is witnessing, seeing with your eyes, imagery, being exposed to imagery, or even hearing something that traumatizes you. And trauma is on a spectrum, if you will, but it's really based on the individual's perception of the experience that qualifies it as trauma. We are not in a position to say, oh no, that wasn't trauma. Oh no, you weren't traumatized. Oh, that doesn't qualify, because if you had experienced what she experienced or he experienced, then you could say, no, that's not how that works. The person who has been exposed to or victim to the impact that it has on them is what determines whether or not that was traumatic. Okay, so I want to put that out there as well. And so when I think about the number of children in our communities who have been exposed to something similar to what this 9-year-old child was exposed to. I was at a visual last year around this time, or maybe it was actually a little before now. There was, at the beginning of 2020, it seemed like there were a series, and even going back to maybe November all the way forward up until the pandemic started or COVID was confirmed. It seemed like there was just so many murders, various heinous murders that were taking place in Aurora and Denver. But one of them that really just sticks in my mind, because from a standpoint of vicarious trauma is usually what professionals or first responders experience in being called to a scene, a crime scene, or interviewing victims, working with victims and families. That's vicarious trauma, what you are experiencing through what someone else is sharing with you, what they are revealing from their experience. And then particularly when you have to respond to them in a way to support them as a professional, or as, be it a medical professional, clinical professional, or otherwise. And so when I think about in my role as a clinician, some of the parents that I've spoken with in particular, and other family members who had young children or siblings who were either witness to a shooting last year, or some type of violent incident, whether it was a family member, mom, sister, etc., who was either murdered or violently abused through a domestic incident. I'm going to come to that comment in just a moment. Let me finish my thought. Some type of violent abuse. It was a high volume number of children who had been exposed or who had lost a sibling through some type of drive-by or gun violence, or physically, or just violent crime. They had lost a loved one, these young children. And some of them were in a situation where they had had multiple losses through violence. Now, I was referencing just a few minutes ago, I was going to share that I was at a visual last year, or now maybe it was the end of 2019, where it was in the front yard of a mother who had lost her daughter. And that crime, there were two last year that just did it for me. This one, where this mother found her daughter, I mean, I hate to even say it, but she found her daughter in the trash bin. She had been murdered. And just, that was just so ugly. And I was there for the visual, and I'm looking around this yard, and I'm looking at how many children appeared to be under 13, under 14, who were crowded in that yard with candles and crying, and some of them just standing, just glaring alone. And then I looked around to see where the adults were. There were very few adults that were present amongst all of these kids who were there for this loss. And I thought, where are the parents? Where are the parents standing with their children, holding their children, nurturing their children through this pain? And I was listening to the different conversations that were happening as I heard some of them talk about how they were just at a visual the week before, or 2 weeks before, or there was another visual coming up. And I thought, my gosh, how overwhelming. So we've talked about post-traumatic slave syndrome. We've talked about a little bit about post-traumatic stress disorder, but I haven't talked much about that. Talked about secondary trauma and vicarious trauma. So we're going to talk in a moment about post-traumatic stress disorder, just so that there can be an even clearer differentiation between the impact of the slave component through trauma versus just the DSM version of PTSD. So if we could go back to that comment real quickly, let me see what that was. And while waiting for that, again, you are watching R&R with Topazz. So we have Miss Calm. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. CALN, Manley. You just have to remember that we are dealing with indigo children. So when you say that we can't, what is it that we can't do? Just looking up indigo children. Talk to us about what indigo children are. That's something that's a new term to me. It sounds pretty special, though. I'm sure I'm going to love it. Indigo children. I can't wait to hear what that is. There was another comment up there from Linda Humanness, I believe. What was that comment? That first one that you put up? I didn't have a chance to read it. I can't process the trauma. Okay, let's see. This is I can't process. Okay, let me get this one in. I can't process that trauma as an adult who saw it live on Facebook. I can't imagine being there watching it and truly feel so helpless or powerless. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now let's go back to that response from the person who was responding to my question. Okay, indigo children, according to a pseudoscientific New Age concept, are children who are believed to possess special, unusual, and sometimes supernatural traits or abilities. The idea is based on concept. Okay. Concepts developed in 1970 by Nancy Ann Tape and further developed by Lee Carroll and Jan Tober. Interesting, interesting. Well, yeah, that's an interesting concept, indigo children. So are you suggesting that that's who our babies are? Are you seeing them as indigo children? And I think that some of them definitely have special gifts. There's no question about that. There's something special about our babies, about just us as a people in general. When I think about what we've had to survive, what we have had to succumb, and the forced resilience that is upon us to be able to not just come through to survive, but to rise above that base level of survival to get to thriving. There is definitely something special about who we are as human beings to have done that. Now, a lot of people want to compare and say, well, what about what the Jews went through? What about what the Chinese slaves and the Japanese, and even the indigenous, and everyone has their story. Everyone has their plight for the most part. I don't know that white Americans or the colonists necessarily what their plight was. I'm not familiar with it, but I think that what Africans, African Americans, melanated Black folk from the Caribbean to I'm sorry, I'm losing in Australia, the Black folk in Australia. Somebody put that in the chat. The Black folks in Australia. The name is escaping me right now. The slaves that were in Cuba and in England and different places, even in Portugal. What we went through as Black people, but in the United States in particular, because of how long we were enslaved, is a very unique experience compared to what everyone else went through. A very unique experience, especially when I think about what was happening 400 years ago and what's happening now. And I think about the modern day lynching that we're exposed to continuously, and the general consensus, so to speak, of the majority of white Europeans in this country and even in other countries would rather talk about everyone else's stuff and everyone else's issues before they'll talk about ours. That's why that which Black folks have been through is continuously put on the back burner. So when I look at, even with this George Floyd, or not George Floyd, because he's not the one that's on trial. So I almost said that wrong. But this officer who is on trial for the murder of George Floyd, the question becomes, and I was very selective about which clip I was going to show. There were a couple of other ones that I wanted to show. But when we look at even the video itself of the murder, there's a lot of talk about don't watch the trial, don't re-traumatize yourself. And even watching the video, there's all this question, should the the young lady have videotaped it? What would you have done if you were there? Would you have videotaped it? Should we watch the trial? How much should we watch? How many times can we watch that video over and over again? We're being re-traumatized over and over every time we are we're exposed to it. And I go back and forth with that. Yes, it is traumatizing to be exposed to this over and over again. But I wonder, would the world have responded to the extreme that they did, where we had protests literally all over the world for Black lives, not the organization Black Lives Matter, but for the message, for the movement, for the real core of the hashtag, if you will, Black Lives. Black Lives Matter is the minimum. Would we have had the response, the level of impact that we had if that video had not been taken? If it was just something that people were talking about, they heard about it. Did you hear about? If that video hadn't been taken, would the world have responded the way they did? Would the pressure be on this judicial system at this place and time now to come out with the right verdict against this officer for the murder of George Floyd if the video wasn't available? So there's that. My answer to that is absolutely not. I don't think that there would have been near the impact. Now, we have to be careful about how much we expose ourselves as Black people to it. I think there's a difference in how we need to be responding to set trauma or exposing ourselves to it, so that we don't end up dehumanizing the process, normalizing the process, objectifying the process, depersonalizing the process. Because in order to adapt, going back to that dynamic of adaptive, an appropriate adaptive behavior to survival or to surviving, we have a tendency to desensitize ourselves. So there's that. Besides the fact that, all the side effects that causes: stress, anger, rage, hurt, all of what goes with that. Drop some of your feelings in the chat of how this has impacted you. How did you feel when you saw that video of this man, this white man, this police officer with his knee on this human being, this Black man's neck, who was pleading and crying out, and that he's just comfortable in his stance? What did that feel like for you? Now, and while I'm waiting for your responses in the chat, then I ask the question of, or I present my position on other folks needing to watch this video so that they get it. Because so many folks out there, and it's not just white, but it's non-Black people who really don't get it. And they're so over us. They're so over Black Lives Mattering. They're so over the idea of really justice, what social justice is. They're so over us being in their face with reparations and demanding that we start getting what rightfully belongs to us, such as inalienable rights. Imagine that. We're still in a place to where we're trying to get some justice for the discriminatory practices for the way that we wear our hair. The Crown Act has just been legalized or put into law in the state of Connecticut, which the state of Connecticut is just the 7th state to move in the direction of decriminalizing discriminating against Black folk for having natural hairstyles. You had kids that were being kicked out of school. You had athletes who weren't allowed to play, military personnel who were being demoted for how they wore their hair. So our trauma is so, what's the word that I'm looking for here? Our trauma is so just constant and consistent. It's daily. It's in the workplace. It's in community. It's amongst our own networks. It's about in our own families. It's when we're facing a police officer. It's and our trauma again is unique because of what we've been through historically, where we came from, that whole piece from coming into and out of slavery. So when you put that, I said I was going to talk about post-traumatic post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. When we put that with PTSD, which then is the response to more general forms of trauma, not the unique trauma, the unique experiences that are unique to us as a culture, unique to us as a race of people, unique to us as a group of folk. You put the more general trauma or experiences that usually results in trauma that everybody can relate to, from a car accident to a loss, through death, financial stress, housing, relationship trauma, divorce, abandonment, starvation, rape, all of those things that are more general to you put that on top of what is unique to us as a people, then we're dealing with something that's a much bigger monster, a much bigger monster. Let me pause again here. Let's see what's happening in the chat. Let me make sure that I'm allowing for time to respond to people's comments. Do we have anything in the chat? No, without the video, it would, let's see, it would not be the same, or it would be the same as always. Yeah. And the reality is, let's see, and this ain't nothing new. Here we go again. Now you see, here it is, finally, at the same time, mad, angry, mostly helpless again. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. And we know that the likelihood that why people responded to that video the way they did, when they did, is because of the pandemic, because everybody was so isolated and pretty much confined to social media or television. People weren't at work. People weren't busy doing all kinds of things. We were still on lockdown. The lockdown was still early. So people's attention was readily available, because when I think about the murder of Castro in his vehicle with his baby girl in the back seat, that was right there live. That was just as horrific, particularly knowing that here was this little girl in the back seat. Let's see. This one says, it was a blatant message, and the fact that people still can make excuses for it or dismiss it is horrifying. Anxiety around law enforcement has increased, sadly. Absolutely, absolutely. And depending on the outcome of this trial, it's also is going to have an impact. I don't know that even if he's found guilty and sent to prison for life, I don't know that our response is necessarily, our anxiety is going to be lowered. And in fact, our anxiety will probably be elevated, because there will be such a reaction from opposition, from the blue liners, who will probably protest, and God only knows what we're going to be up against at that point. And again, those are the things that continue to influence the uniqueness of our trauma. And what we are contending with as a people. Last year, at that time, when I think about the fact that there were so many, or there were these murders that were back to back. There are 4 that were back to back that made national news. And we didn't have time really to process and get over the first one before there was another one. It began with the gentleman, and forgive me because his name escapes me at the moment, who was in his home in Texas, and the police officer came in, and the woman came in, gunned him down in his own apartment, and then cried that, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. I thought I was in the wrong place. I thought that, this is not my apartment. What? Oh my gosh. I thought this was an intruder. Yeah. So there was that one. And then we know that right after the trial, then one of the key witnesses, this young Black man who was on the witness stand, who broke my heart watching him on that witness stand as he cried, he was just horrified. He had been looking through the peephole in his apartment and watched what happened. And we know that he was murdered in his vehicle in the parking lot of the complex. So that was happening. Then shortly after that, maybe less than 30 days, then we had the murder of the woman who was in her home with her nephew, I believe it was, and she was shot. The officer came and shot through her window and killed her in her home, minding her own business. So there were both of those, both in Texas, both very close in proximity. That was in, I believe, the fall of 2019. Then we start coming into 2020, and the first one that happened was the Ahmaud Arbery modern day lynching. Here he was in Georgia, coming through the community, jogging, running, however you want to look at it. And then here come these racist men who are on this truck, who chased this man in a truck with guns and gunned him down. So there's that. Now, this is still just in months of proximity to what was happening in Texas. Had we had an opportunity to really process what happened with these 2 residents, these 2 people who were in their residence and gunned down by police officers, both of them. So then there was that. Then we had Breonna Taylor, another Black woman, in her home, in the bed, sleeping in the middle of the night. Officers come in and just riddle that apartment with bullets, and in riddling her body while they're at it, murdering her. And then and even when they're doing this, there's this question about whether or not the person was in the right place at the right time. And they try to bring up their criminal history, or, after all, George Floyd was passing counterfeit $20 bill. What the heck? So we call that, we've got a new term, maybe to some of you who are watching this evening, that's attached to our trauma. And we're going to call that racial gaslighting. That is a form of racial gaslighting right there, where they're constantly trying to put it back on us. Well, after all, Michael Brown did do this. George Floyd did do this, or all of these reasons to try to justify why you treated this human being like a wild animal, that you were out in the jungle hunting, or in the woods hunting on a hunting trip. So I'm going to stop there for a moment because I've said a lot. Some people may be triggered out there. So I want to just pause. And again, I want to hear from you, because this is supposed to be a space for you to share and express how you're feeling. But I know that hearing some of those things probably brought up a lot for you, or some pain for you. But I wanted to bring to your remembrance this trail which is not even all of it that's been happening, that just happened in the past year, that is probably suppressed somewhere down in here, somewhere deep down in here, just suppressed. Why it's so anxiety producing to be pulled over by a police officer, to be in some type of encounter that involves a police officer, or the idea of needing to call the police or involve the police. Why and then we still have to be concerned about moving in the dark, just in general. Is it safe? And not just in the dark, but now we also have to be concerned about being in a crowd of white folks. Is it safe? Are these Proud Boys? Is there somebody in this crowd who would dare, jump out and do something crazy? We have to be more vigilant and paying attention to our surroundings and what's happening. And then again, going back to the things that cause PTSD, going back to just those regular, same old kinds of experiences. Carjacking is on the rise right now all over the country. Car theft in general. There's still that. There's still cancer. There's still elderly family members who are dying. There's still relationship issues that people are having. There's still financial issues that some folks are having. So we're still dealing with all that too. So I wanted to spend this last 10, 15 minutes that we have just talking about releasing. Coming to a place of managing all of these ugly realities, because we could talk about the ugliness of it all day long, but what do we do? What do we do to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves? What do we do to make sure that the trauma isn't managing us, but making sure that we're managing the trauma? So are there any questions or comments in the chat that I need to respond to before I jump into this last phase of tonight's show? So let's talk about the ways in which trauma affects us, just common side effects of the various degrees and types of trauma that I've addressed tonight, from the PTSS to PTSD, vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, and now looking at how racist gaslighting occurs, which then becomes a form of trauma. So let's look at what some of the side effects of this trauma is. For the most part, the number one thing is going to be stress. Very stressful. It elevates our stress and intensifies our stress levels. And we know that stress has a direct impact on our immune system. So in the middle of a pandemic related to COVID-19 and other strands of this virus that seem to be breaking out that nobody can explain, we need the best immune systems that we could probably have. We need the strongest immune systems. Now we need our immune system to be better than ever. But yet we're in the midst of all of this trauma that is causing stress, elevating stress, that then in turn erodes our immune system. So what do we need to be doing? We need to make sure that, number one, we're taking a look at how we're feeding our bodies, what we're putting into our bodies. A lot of times when we're under stress is when we take the worst care of ourselves. So increasing alcohol, the alcohol intake, what we're eating, we're just throwing down sugar, lots of sugar, and sugar automatically erodes our immune system. So the stress and then the sugar, so the sugar in the alcohol, the sugar in the sweets that we're eating, from chocolates to cake to whatever it is, your ice cream, people go on ice cream binges. So then we have to delay our gratification. We have to redirect our thought process, recondition ourselves so that those things that we might ordinarily convince ourselves is what's going to make us feel better may be the very thing that we have to shift the narrative and change that to, this is not what's going to make me feel better. Actually, I need to eat something or consume something that I might not otherwise, because I've convinced myself in the past that that is yuck. All those vegetables, all of those green vegetables, those nutrients. We need to start consuming more of those green vegetables. We need to start consuming more of a healthy diet, getting the things in there that are going to feed our immune system. Now, if you're not ready to give up all the sugar, you're not ready to give up all the alcohol, at least slow down. Just slow down. And you might want to just slow down on the weed too, if you're smoking that kind of weed that gives you the munchies, because obviously now all you're doing is setting yourself up to eat a whole lot more, because you're smoking the weed to calm down, reduce your anxiety, but now you want to eat more, and now you're eating the wrong thing, because usually having the munchies is not, you're not usually hungry for something healthy. So there's that. So slow yourself down as much as you can. Work on discipline, getting an exercise regimen in there, get an exercise workout routine in there, because the more you are physically active, the more that it can actually begin to curb your appetite. I know that when I was working out, consistently, because there was a time when I was truly the workout queen, it was like I just didn't even want to eat. I was eating very little. And a lot of times when you physically exert yourself in that way, it really does reduce your appetite, but it's also increasing those endorphins. And with those endorphins increasing, you are more alert. You have a tendency to be more focused, because stress in eroding the immune system takes away from our ability to focus in the way that we should, and it causes brain fog, and it affects short-term memory loss. So exercise and nutrition, getting those shifting in those areas helps in so many ways. The benefit far exceeds what the short-term gratification, self-gratification that we get from doing all those things that are bad for us. We just have to retrain our brain, recondition ourselves. And it's a process. It really is. It does take discipline. Then making sure that we get the appropriate new supplements, making sure that we're taking our vitamins, getting the right vitamins, making sure that getting our vitamin D, getting our vitamin B12, getting those omegas, and get the right omegas, depending on what you're combating. From a lot of my clients, I recommend omegas, omega-3s, for depression. It can help with depression over time, and much better for us than the pharmaceuticals. We want to stay away from the pharmaceuticals as much as we can, the legal ones, yes, even the legal ones, because of, still all of the verdict being out about what those side effects look like in the long run, because we're constantly hearing about things later. And then when they go through the litany of side effects on a commercial, that should be enough to deter you from some of those prescriptive medications that they have out there. So getting those supplements can really help to help manage with the circulation, blood circulation. It can help with the heart. It can help with the functioning of the brain. There are some natural supplements out there that really help with brain fog as well. I'm going to say, just going ahead and put his name out there, Montague Connolly. I have a lot of respect for him. I would encourage you, if you live in the Denver area, and even if you don't, and I don't have his contact information because, I didn't even think of that until now, that, man, I should have had all of these resources. I'll have them for you next week if you don't have them by then. But he is an excellent go-to to get knowledge, get an assessment on what supplements may work best for you with regard to wherever you are, with regard to your current regime, your diet, your exercise, and even some some health issues that you may have. And I'm going to be careful about how I put that out there, because he's not a physician, but he is definitely a master with regard to his knowledge about natural supplements, herbs, and organics, I'm sorry. And I'm not talking about weed either, for the one, whoever's thinking about that. And then with regard to exercise, get your personal trainer, someone who can really help you, or just go on your own, walk, run, just get movement, get movement. It's so helpful. Taking care of yourselves, taking care of ourselves. I want to say this though, there's so much that we can do for ourselves, but there's one area, as I mentioned, the racial gaslighting, there's one area, that what we do for ourselves is not going to be enough, including therapy. I recommend therapy that's physical therapy as well as your mental health therapy, finding a good therapist that matches with you and where you're at with your mental and emotional health. Claudette says stress is very cyclical because stress, fatigue, over and under eating, consuming substances, etc. Therefore, not motivated to move, exercise, and then there's the weight gain, stress cycle, etc. It does become very cyclical. I agree. But I was going to say, making sure that you get your mental health balanced, find a therapist that matches for you. You don't necessarily have to be in therapy long term. It may be a short term. Maybe you just need a therapist for a few months to help you work through some things. And just because you haven't dealt with your stress, your childhood stress, doesn't mean that it's gone away. Maybe it's been 10 years since that whatever happened to you. Maybe it's been, you were 5 years old and you never dealt with it. The fact that you don't ever deal with it makes it more likely that it is affecting how you're functioning or in dysfunction today. It's not going to hurt you to look into it and to really assess. Just because you're doing great over here, when you look at how you're functioning in this area of your life, is there a balance? Is there a balance in how you're functioning professionally and how you're functioning personally? How you're functioning personally and how you're functioning intimately? Is there a balance? Do you see a continuum with regard to what that looks like? Or are you so busy excelling over here, overcompensating in this area, that this area over here, the rest of your life is a hot mess? Maybe your credit score is 750, but your social skills are 5. Your relationship experiences and how you've done, what your track record looks like, where you are spiritually, etc. So anyway, your mental health matters, your physical health matters. Yes, I am a psychotherapist. My private practice is Rediscovery Through Wellness. I do have a Facebook page, a business Facebook page. Check it out. I do offer a 30-minute free consultation, phone consultation. And if I'm not a good match for you, there are some other people that I can recommend or refer you to, because as I said earlier, I do try to stay in my lane, my area of expertise, informed trauma, and just helping people, guiding people through unexpected life changes. Unexpected life changes are on a continuum. There are various things that catch us off guard, and sometimes we just need a little guidance to get back on track. Couples therapy, individual therapy, family therapy, group therapy, and community services are available as well through Rediscovery Through Wellness. I also recommend, I was talking about physical therapy, massage. Get yourself a good therapeutic massage therapist. Mine is Sheila Raleigh, and she is amazing. She is, and Jahala is also really good. I've used her in the past. And I'm just going to put Sheila's number out there for anyone who is looking for a therapeutic massage therapist. She is off the chain. I just can't say enough about her. She's so good. I've been going to her every week. It does get expensive, but it's been worth it, because she I mean, she just helps, that is just my self-care, that and doing my flowers. Her number is 720-278-1038, 278-1038. Sheila, massage therapist. I've discovered this float thing going on, you guys. Have you been to a float tank? Oh my goodness. If you haven't been to a float tank, talk about de-stress. That is an amazing experience. There are some flotation tanks. I do Indigo Float. We were talking about Indigo babies earlier, so I thought that was interesting. Indigo Float, tell them Topazz sent you. But if you're wondering where you are with your stress, your trauma, look at these emotions and look at these, how you're doing with these behaviors. How are you sleeping? How are you eating? What does your diet look like? What does your sleep look like? What does your focus look like? What is your mood, your attitude, your sex drive? Where are you with intimacy? Where are you with yourself? Are you even paying attention to you? You're so busy paying attention to everything else. When's the last time you did a real thorough self-assessment and just really slowed down and took a look at self? So that you can truly identify what you need to get on track, to get focused, so that you can start moving in a forward direction, because you can do that in spite of the pandemic, in spite of trauma, in spite of whatever you've been through. We can get through this. We can thrive. We don't have to settle at surviving, but we do have to start someplace. I'm going to be talking about sexual abuse next week, another form of trauma. This is National Sexual Abuse Awareness Month, for those of you that may not know. So I'll be talking about that, and that, just giving you a trigger alert warning in advance. But there are some things that we just really need to talk about as a community. So this has been R&R with Topazz. Just want to take a minute and breathe. It's been some heavy stuff. Let's just pause. Let's just take in a deep breath. And let it out slowly through your mouth. The proper way to breathe is to, when you're inhaling, that your stomach should be expanding. You're filling up your lungs, you're filling up your diaphragm, and then you release with slow, quick breaths, and then sometimes with just slow, continuous breath. For me, the slow, continuous breath works better, and we're opening up our blood cells. We're helping our blood flow, get your blood flow going, but your blood flow to your head. You'd be surprised at how many times in the course of the day that you literally stop breathing. You don't even realize that you're holding your breath. Breathing matters. Release. This has been R&R with Topazz. Monday Mind Matters. Subscribe, share, like, follow, hit the link on YouTube, the notification bell, so that you can be notified anytime anything with CTN Media airs. Make sure that you watch 7 Generations Black tomorrow at 4 p.m. On Wednesday at 10 a.m. You have the Resource Report on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Follow CTN Media for your Black media news, informative information, learn, get educated, get inspired with CTN Media, where we are changing the narrative, powered by the Black Business Initiative. Thank you for watching. Look forward to seeing you next Monday at 7 p.m. I'll be back right here on the same station, R&R with Topazz, sending you good vibes, good energy, peace, and true blessings, everybody. Good night.
Malcolm X once said, if you're not careful, the newspaper will have you hating the people who are being oppressed. Malcolm X